Hello, welcome to this David Icke videocast. Well, three themes are constantly in the news at the moment. One is Russia. It's the Russians who are accused daily, hourly, of interfering in the internal happenings in the United States and other countries. We have Israel constantly in the news because of what's happening in Israel and particularly Palestine and the occupied territories. And we have Jeremy Corbyn making the headlines again daily at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition Labour Party in Britain, who is under siege amid accusations coming from all the usual suspects of being an anti-Semite or not dealing with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And these three constant current themes can be dot connected by uttering the word that increasingly must not be spoken: Zionism. Zionism. What is that? Well, Zionism, that's Jewish people, isn't it? No, it's not. It's a political philosophy, which many Jewish people don't agree with. And at its core, at its real core, it's not even a political philosophy in the sense that it's perceived. It's a secret society. And it's a secret society that locks into the great global web of secret societies. And that's one reason, but only one, why it gets such extraordinary global attention and coverage. And while Israel, a country on a tiny piece of land with a population of 8 million, many of those not Jewish, why Israel, despite that background, gets phenomenal amounts, not just of coverage, but of influence, where the Prime Minister Netanyahu just ups and goes and meets whoever he likes, which any other country, even far bigger than Israel, would never have the ability to do. And this core of Zionism is described in the term revisionist Zionism. Now, just as you have in Islam, you have the wide body of Islam, and then you have Wahhabism, which was created by the Saudi Arabian royal family in league with the British Empire. And that's the extreme version of Islam, which manifests as terrorism and ISIS and other such horrors. So in Zionism, you have this extreme version of Zionism, revisionist Zionism, which is that which is driving currently the Israel agenda against the Palestinians, and, by the way, against Jeremy Corbyn, and the Zionist mentality that surrounds and controls Donald Trump. Now, in my new book, Everything You Need to Know But Never Been Told, I describe the background to revisionist Zionism. Find the page, here we go, which will help to put current events in some kind of context, not just current events, but events that have been happening for a very long time. I say in the book, secret society Zionism is also known as revisionist Zionism, an ideology founded on violence by Russian Jew Zeev, also known as Vladimir Jabotinsky in the 1920s, who pledged to seize Palestine with, quote, an iron wall of Jewish bayonets. Today they use high-tech missiles. Jabotinsky, 1880 to 1940, set out to, quote, create with sweat and blood a race of men, strong, brave, and cruel, that would impose a greater Israel from the River Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. This describes the largest expanse of alleged biblical Israel. Now, the famous Jewish scientist Albert Einstein and other prominent Jews sent a letter to the New York Times in 1948 describing Irgun. This was a revisionist Zionism enforcement arm, a terrorist group, horrific terrorist group, actually. Rightly, Einstein and these other prominent Jews describe Irgun as a terrorist group and right-wing, and founded on, quote, ultra-nationalism, religious mysticism, and racial superiority. The letter described the Israeli party representing Zionist revisionist thinking, mentality, as, quote, closely akin in its organization, methods, political philosophy, and social appeal to the Nazi and fascist parties. Now, this is Albert bloody Einstein and other prominent Jews in America. And under current, increasingly imposed definitions of anti-Semitism, Einstein and these other prominent Jewish people would not be allowed to say that today. And I go on to point out that brutal Israel prime ministers, Menachem Begin, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, Yitzhak Shamir and Ariel Sharon, and now Benjamin Netanyahu, all glean their ideology from that of Jabotinsky. In fact, Netanyahu's father was a personal assistant to Jabotinsky, who created this extreme, anything goes, violent revisionist Zionism. And this ideology is based on unrestrained and unrelenting violence to impose the Zionist, revisionist Zionist will. So that's some background to the division between Jewish people, what is called Zionism in the wider sense, and this inner core revisionist Zionism. And it's this mentality that has taken over the Trump administration. I mean, hello. And because of the control of Trump, Israel, Netanyahu, etc., the Israeli regime, now feels it can do whatever it likes because it's going to get no pushback from Trump. And that is exactly what's happened. You look back to the point where Trump was elected, and that's when the building on Palestinian land with new Jewish-only settlements began to really motor, and it's continued ever since. We've had the American embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because of this revisionist Zionist control of Trump. And we are seeing also the movement to remove Palestinians from Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, because the ultimate goal, I've been writing this now for 30 years nearly, is to replace the Al-Aqsa Mosque, currently on what Jews call Temple Mount, with a new rebuilt Solomon's Temple. This is where it is going. And, you know, I talked earlier about this inner core of revisionist Zionism being a secret society within Zionism, and how it locks into the wider web of secret societies. Well, of course, one of the most famous secret societies ever is the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar were obsessed with Jerusalem. They had a headquarters there at one point, in that area of where the mosque is. And so there is a movement within this secret society network, not just through what we call Zionism or revisionist Zionism, but through the web as a whole, to bring about this, what is to them, absolutely symbolic move of building this rebuilt Solomon's Temple. And all this becomes possible to move forward quicker and quicker because of the control that revisionist Zionists have over Trump. And you're also seeing, of course, as usual, Israel just bombing in places like Syria at will, without any resistance, any pushback. And people need to ask themselves, here we have a country which is tiny, with a population that is tiny, and yet its regime can do all these things, including, what it does to the Palestinians, which is unspeakable. Again, see how that's become more and more blatantly extreme, with snipers picking off civilians behind a security fence, blowing the legs off kids, etc., killing medics, journalists, because they know there's no pushback. Why? Because they control Trump. You can't say that. I just bloody have. And this is how extraordinarily arrogant it is now become, knowing there's no pushback. This is the nation-state law that has just been passed by a regime that constantly seeks to silence opposition through, you're a racist. That has enshrined Jewish supremacy into the law of Israel. There's a word for that. You may have heard it in relation to South Africa. Apartheid. That's what it is, an apartheid law, imposed by a regime that shouts and hurls the label racist at anyone who dares, has the audacity to question anything it does. So this is the story. Israel passed a law giving Jews supremacy over all non-Jewish Israeli citizens, which critics and members of the state's Palestinian minority call racist, likening legislation to apartheid. It's not likened to apartheid, it is apartheid. Let me read that again. Israel passed a law giving Jews supremacy over all non-Jewish Israeli citizens, enshrined in the law of the land, while hurling daily abuse at people like Jeremy Corbyn and his area of the Labour Party for being racist. I mean, talk about cognitive dissonance, although it isn't, because they know what they're doing. The Parliament Speaker of the Knesset called on security to eject Palestinian MPs who were led out crying, "You are racist." Quite a reasonable observation in the circumstances, I would have thought. This is a defining moment in the annals of Zionism and the history of the State of Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the Knesset after the vote. The law says this: that Israel is the historic homeland and the national home of the Jewish people. Well, that is massively debatable if you look at history outside of the mainstream. But I've talked about that elsewhere. The law says that only Jews have the right to exercise national self-determination in Israel. Apartheid! You're a racist. But apartheid isn't. It says that Jerusalem is Israel's capital and Hebrew is the language. Describes Jewish settlement as a national value to be promoted by the state. And what that means is building more and more Jewish-only settlements, apartheid, racism, on occupied Palestinian land, which they've been doing faster and faster, not least since Trump came to power, because again, they knew there would be no resistance, and there has not been. Hassan Yabarin, General Director of Adalah, the Legal Center for Arab Minority Rights in Israel, said the law features key elements of apartheid, which he said is not only immoral, but also absolutely prohibited by international law. He said the new law constitutionally enshrines the identity of Israel as the nation state of Jewish people only, despite the 1.5 million Palestinian citizens of the state and residents of East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, and guarantees the exclusive ethnic religious character of Israel as Jewish, he said. By defining sovereignty and democratic self-rule as belonging solely to the Jewish people, wherever they live around the world, Israel has made discrimination a constitutional value and has professed its commitment to favoring Jewish supremacy as the bedrock of its institutions. And even Haaretz, the newspaper that does speak out against the Netanyahu regime, has said in this headline here, new Jewish state law makes Israel an apartheid regime, says country's leading newspaper. It said in an editorial titled The Apartheid Prime Minister that bluntly, that thanks to the new nation state of the Jewish people law that Netanyahu spearheaded, Israel under Netanyahu is an apartheid regime. How does all this square, pray, with Zionist organizations and its apologists in the British political class and British corporate media? How does all that square with accusing Jeremy Corbyn of being racist, anti-Semitic, and all the other abuse that's now daily spewed out in his direction? Does anyone ever look at where the racism really is? No. Why? Because it's not what the agenda wants to happen. So let's put a few names on this. Trump's biggest funder to bring him to power was a guy called Sheldon Adelson, a American-Israeli casino magnate and media magnate who basically owns him. Also around him, he appointed two ultra-Zionists who worked for his Trump organization, Jason Greenblatt, who he appointed to be his international negotiator, including negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis. I'm sure that will be unbiased. And David Friedman, who he made ambassador to Israel, actually ambassador for Israel, if the truth be told, who was one of the major forces that ensured that the embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which has massive, massive significance for what it says about the aspirations of Palestinians for their own state. And around him too is his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has known Benjamin Netanyahu almost all of his life, because Netanyahu and Kushner's father, who went to jail, by the way, for fraud, were great friends. And Kushner is now, with these other characters, manipulating events to withdraw funding from Palestinians, to make their life so horrific in endless ways, and then come along and say, when they're in absolute where do we go next destitution, oh, here's some money to sort it out, but for that money you've got to agree to concede all this to Israel. That's what's happening. That's what this deal of the century they talk about is all about. And then you have Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, another one of these people that worships Israel, and was a member of the Project for the New American Century, which was created by ultra-Zionists in the United States, like William Crystal and Robert Kagan, and has been the driving force. You can see it in its documents, one of them published in September 2000, in which it has listed the countries it wants to regime change: Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, North Korea. All countries that have been targeted or are in the process of being targeted ever since. And so Bolton is now pushing, as he has for years, regime change in Iran, as he's pushed every other regime change. Why? Because he's another front man for revisionist Zionism. And we now have reached the point where, of course, there was an agreement between the West, the United States, the West, and the regime in Iran, called the nuclear deal, which kind of settled everything down. But of course, once Trump came in, he did what revisionist Zionists wanted. He wanted to kill the deal so that this conflict could be reignited. And of course, when you've got to power on the back of the massive financial contributions of Sheldon Adelson, and you are surrounded by these ultra-Zionist people, then that's what you do. And indeed, this is a story confirming in a recording of Netanyahu that it was Israel, well, we all knew it anyway, but this is just confirmation, that drove the Trump administration to ditch the nuclear agreement with Iran. This is the headline. In recording, Netanyahu boasts Israel convinced Trump to quit Iran nuclear deal. In a video clip aired Tuesday by Israeli television, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu boasted that Israel was responsible for US President Donald Trump's decision to quit the Iran nuclear deal. In the video, which the public broadcaster said was filmed 2 weeks ago, Netanyahu can be seen speaking to activists and senior members of his Likud party. Well, of course, because to bring two of these themes together that I mentioned earlier, while people are talking about Russia constantly, Russia being the major manipulator of events in America. The ultra-Zionists go on manipulating events in America. And I've just been looking, as you saw there, through my papers for this. This is something that was said this week by the Jewish activist in America, Noam Chomsky. This is the headline. Israeli intervention in US elections vastly overwhelms anything Russia has done, claims Noam Chomsky. Veteran activist Noam Chomsky has accused Israel of brazenly interfering in US electoral politics in a way that vastly outweighs any efforts that may have been carried out by Russia. Israeli intervention, he said, in US elections vastly overwhelms anything the Russians may have done. I mean, even to the point where the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, goes directly to Congress without even informing the President and speaks to Congress with overwhelming applause to try to undermine the President's policies. What happened with Obama and Netanyahu, he said in 2015. So I ask again, where does the power to do that from a country on a tiny piece of land with a population of 8 million? Where does the power come from for that to happen? I mean, anyone who's kind of going, oh no conspiracy, just ask your bloody self that question and see if you can find a bloody answer. So, to keep this quiet, to stop it coming out, and many other things to come out, Israel and Zionism has a global network, especially in the West, of organizations that are there to equate criticism and exposure of Israel or Zionism with anti-Semitism. Even though Zionism is not a race, it is a political philosophy, and as I say, at its core, revisionist Zionism, it's a secret society. And so this is why Jeremy Corbyn and his part of the Labour Party, I say that because much of it is still owned by paragons of virtue like Tony Blair, they are targeting Corbyn as an anti-Semite because they want to silence criticism of Israel that comes from that source and the people that support him. You see, the equation is simple. By now, we've reached the point where the Conservative Party in Britain, currently in government, will not criticise Israel. Job done. Whoop. The so-called Centre Party, the Liberal Democrats, what's bloody left of it, they will never criticise Israel. In fact, people who have in the party have been thrown out. Sorted it. The vast Blairite, as it's called, part of the Labour Party, which is most of the MPs in Parliament, will never criticise Israel. In fact, some of them quite the opposite. Sorted. So that leaves Corbyn and that group around him, who will criticise Israel, not because they're racist, but because they have a sense of humanity in looking at the extraordinary abuse of an entire people, the Palestinians. So, we've shut everybody else up. How do we shut them up? We'll have this massive campaign of incessant and hysterical abuse at Jeremy Corbyn, in which we will accuse him of, first of all, not dealing with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and then we'll move it more and more. He is actually an anti-Semite. And the latest furore has come from the revelations that in 2010 he chaired a meeting at which someone likened the Israeli regime to the Nazis. Okay, but who was this person? He was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was a survivor of Auschwitz. So now you are anti-Semitic if you chair a meeting in which a Holocaust survivor who actually experienced it likens some Israeli regime actions in regard to the Palestinians as comparable. So we are now seeing Holocaust survivors told they cannot speak from their experience. And they're being told that by people who never even came close to the Holocaust or living in Nazi Germany at that time. Do you know what I find? You know what I find that to be? Stomach-turningly grotesque. And as part of this whole shut down any criticism of Israel by labeling everyone an anti-Semite, we've had the new definition of anti-Semitism, which Corbyn and the Labour Party are now being accused of being anti-Semitic for not accepting all of it. And I can see why, because if you accept all of it, you are basically accepting that criticism of Israel and Zionism equates to anti-Semitism, which is a frickin' nonsense. And you know, before I just get into the nature of this definition and why it needs to be challenged, if we had proper journalists in this country, as opposed to repeaters of the official story, then they would go to organizations like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which is always targeting me or trying to, and is one of the major forces pressing this campaign against Corbyn and the Labour Party. I say forces, it's a man and a bloody dog. But it gets lots of coverage, so it seems to be bigger than it really is. This is the organisation that's now started to use the law against people to try to silence them. They might go to the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and they might ask it a few questions like, what's your agenda? Why did you come out of nowhere in the middle of the last grotesque, murderous bombardment of Gaza by the Israeli regime? Why did you appear in the middle of all that? Now you're walking the corridors of power and appearing in the papers all the time. They might ask the chairman of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, a guy called Gideon Falter, how he can have the nerve to accuse Corbyn of anti-Semitism, or the Labour Party of anti-Semitism, or anybody of anti-Semitism, which actually means anti-Arab, by the way. In truth, this is the nonsense that we're talking about. They might ask him how he can have the nerve to do that when he is serving on the UK board of the Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund, which for decades and decades and decades has been gathering together donations to buy up land in Israel which only Jewish people can live on. Which is why many Jewish people around the world accuse the Jewish National Fund of being an apartheid operation. You ever thought of asking Mr. Falter that? Mainstream media? Oh no, can't do that. What will the bosses say? So let's look at this. Let's look at his definition of anti-Semitism that is at the heart of the current attack on Jeremy Corbyn. What is a realistic, sensible, balanced definition of anti-Semitism? Again, anti-Semitism, being anti-Jewish. Semitism refers to a group of languages in the Middle East, the overwhelming vast majority of which are Arabic languages, by the way. But what would be a balanced definition of what they call anti-Semitism? It would be hatred of Jews and discrimination against Jews because they are Jewish. Boom. Finished. And you know what? I'd be at the front of the line agreeing with that and saying that that's fair enough, mate. That should not happen. But that's not good enough when you're trying to stop criticism of Israel. So, what they do is they give a definition, but then they give examples of what that definition means, and this is where the devil is in the detail. And this is why people in the Labour Party, Corbyn and people around him, are resisting accepting this in totality, because of what it really means. Okay, here are some of the examples of what is anti-Semitism. The myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions. So, nowhere ever in history, nowhere in the present, and nowhere any time in the future is it possible in any way, shape or form or expression for any group of people who are Jewish to conspire together to reach a certain outcome that is desirable to them. That's never going to happen. It's never happened. It's not happening. It can't happen. And it can't be investigated to see if it's happening. Oh no, that's anti-Semitic. No, that's censorship that stops legitimate investigation into activities that would be legitimate to investigate in any other group of people worldwide. Why does one group of people have to be protected from that when no one else is? Just a question. Another example, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing by a single Jewish person or group. That is fair enough. Groups, I mean, I'm vehemently, fundamentally against groupthink and group judgment. It's childlike. It should take every individual action in and of itself. But, hold on. Accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group. But, under this definition, if you point out a Jewish person or a Jewish group for wrongdoing, you become an anti-Semite. Because this is about protecting all legitimate investigation, if the truth be told. Then it goes on about denying details of the Holocaust. And, you know, of course, terrible atrocities were inflicted on Jewish people in Nazi Germany. But people can't question any detail of it at all. They've got to accept it all, every last detail, without question, otherwise they're an anti-Semite. What other historical event ever does that happen to? Or can you find a comparison? What it means is that people are jailed in some countries for having a different version of history. If they're wrong, prove them wrong. Prove them wrong. That's what discourse is about. Accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing and exaggerating the Holocaust, okay, covered that. Accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. That you suggest that about anybody, and you're an anti-Semite by this definition. So, once again, what it's saying is there are no Jewish people anywhere in the world that are more loyal to Israel or have their priority as what is best for Jewish people above the interests of the countries they live in. There's no one. No one in the entire world would ever do that. Thus, you can't accuse them of it, because if you do, it's because you're an anti-Semite. This is a cracker, this. Breathe, Dave. Denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g., by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. This is said about a country that has just enshrined Jewish supremacy into its own law of the state. And Corbyn and the Labour Party, those around him, are accused of anti-Semitism because they will not enshrine that into the official Labour Party definition of anti-Semitism. Speechless can be the only response. Applying double standards by requiring of Israel behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. What, like not shooting the legs off kids through a sniper's gun sight? How about that? And drawing comparisons of contemporary Israel policy to that of the Nazis. So, once again, there is no policy that Israel could ever impose that could be compared with what the Nazis in Germany did. None. Ever. Not into the entirety of what we call the future. What this is the creation of no-go areas in terms of legitimate investigation, questioning and exposure of the extremes of the Israeli regime and what it's doing to Palestinians and more. That's what it is. Let's cut the frickin' bullshit and start looking at it as it really is. Now, the organization that came up with this definition is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which was launched in 1998, has 31 member countries, and in its official biography, names like Tony Blair and Bill Clinton appear. Ooh, nothing to worry about then. Its senior advisor from the start was Yehuda Bauer, professor of Holocaust Studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a Zionist. He's now the honorary chairman, apparently. And the executive secretary of this organization is another a lady called Catherine Mayer, who is apparently based in Berlin, Germany. And to say this is not an unbiased organization is saying it's cold occasionally in the Antarctic. Now, I read an article the last couple of days by a political commentator and writer called John White, spelt like the Isle of Wight. And it really did capture what I'm saying here about what this is all about. It's worth hearing. He talks about the he's an anti-Semite mob hurling all this abuse at Corbyn. He says they are, quote, a sundry crew of, in the main, very middle class, very affluent, very mendacious champions of war. Iraq, Libya, anyone? And defenders of Israel's oppression and dispossession of the Palestinian people, who to all intents have been marked out as children of a lesser God. Exactly. Many of these defenders of Israel occupy prime positions within the mainstream media, within the Labour Party itself as MPs, indeed within the establishment in general. Why? Why are the establishment in general so obsessed with doing what Israel wants? And key among them are members of a pro-Israel lobby that is committed to policing and controlling the terms of the debate when it comes to the treatment of the Palestinians. At their behest, people in Britain have been invited to enter an upside-down world in which lifelong committed anti-racists, such as Corbyn, are presented as rabid racists and anti-Semites, while they, proponents of regime change, wars and defenders of apartheid, are presented as warriors of integrity and decency. Exactly. Pitted against those machine values, as he puts it, are the values of human solidarity espoused by Jeremy Corbyn. They are values held by those who refuse to accede to the dehumanization of the poor and the marginalized at home, or the oppressed and dispossessed abroad, regardless of creed, religion, ethnicity, or culture. Neither Corbyn nor his supporters, many of them Jewish, which is always forgotten, because trying to accuse a Jewish person of anti-Semitism is a bit of a challenge, though they try. Many of them Jewish could care one whit about the Jewish character of the State of Israel. What they are exercised about, rightly, is the country's apartheid character. What they will not accept is that in 2018, millions of men, women and children can be herded, besieged, molested, killed, occupied and brutalized at will. Learning the lessons of history is non-negotiable. And there has been nothing more squalid in our history than settler colonialism, responsible for the expiration of the Native American Indians of North America and the Aborigines of Australia. Those historical comparisons are fundamental when it comes to understanding the nature of the oppression and dispossession of the Palestinians in our time. That an Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu can pass an explicit apartheid law, the country's so-called nation-state law, mandating and enshrining the superior status of the state's Jewish citizens over its Arab minority of 1.8 million citizens, and do so without any international sanction, is a shameful indictment. Well, for reasons explained, they're not going to face any reprisals from the United States, nor Britain and the rest of them. And this development came, White says, you may recall, on the heels of the weeks-long massacre of Palestinians in Gaza during the Great Return March, during which Israeli army snipers shot down unarmed protesters like deer in a forest, some while cheering the results of their work as if it was a sport. Yet, no matter, we are expected to believe that it is Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters, those who oppose such developments and acts, who are deserving of being witch-hunted, chased from pillar to post by a feral UK mainstream media that has entered full firing squad mode. Absolutely fricking exactly. We are blatantly in the midst of a massive operation to silence any criticism of Israel and exposure of Israel and its apartheid racist regime. Not just because of what is happening now or what has happened, but because of what is planned to happen. Get your censorship in first. Now, of course, Russia is being blamed for endless manipulations on the back of no evidence worth the name. But there is a Russian connection in this sense. A lot of people won't realize this. Here's an article headed, Israel's former Soviet immigrants transform adopted society. Russian-speaking Jews who arrived over the past 20 years have integrated little but influenced everything from culture to politics. The million-plus citizens of the former Soviet Union who emigrated to Israel in the past 20 years have not only made new lives of their own, but they have transformed their adopted country. They have influenced the culture, high-tech industry, language, education, and perhaps most significantly, Israeli politics. Jews in the former Soviet Union were largely banned from migrating to Israel before the collapse of the empire, but from 1990 onwards they came in their thousands, and they constitute now around 15% of Israel's 7.7 million population. From 1990, anyone from the former Soviet Union who had a Jewish father or grandparent, or who was married to someone meeting those criteria, was granted Israeli citizenship under the country's law of return. So people who are not Jewish could go and move to Israel under this so-called law of return, but the hundreds of thousands, like 700,000 Palestinians who were forced out of the country when Israel was being created around 1948, cannot come back to the land their forefathers lived on. What is the justification of Israel being established in that land? Because that's where our forefathers come from. A fact I would challenge, by the way, and many Jewish historians also vehemently challenge. According to Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, around 30% of immigrants from the former Soviet Union in the 1990s were not Jews, were not considered Jewish or under Orthodox law. In 2005, that figure leapt to 59%. Only around 5% of the non-Jews have converted. So here we have this massive influx of non-Jews who are having a very significant impact on what happens in Israel. Worth investigating? Oh no, that's anti-Semitic. And here's an Israeli journalist saying some very interesting things. Her name is Lily Galili. Galili. An Israeli journalist. She says this: it was a very different type of immigration. She's talking about the influx from the former Soviet Union and Russia, etc. She writes this in a book about the impact of the tidal wave from the former Soviet Union. They didn't want to integrate, she said. They wanted to lead. They changed the nature of the country. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Israeli politics, particularly in the rise of Avigdor Lieberman, Israel's Moldova-born foreign minister, and his far-right policy. Lieberman, or Lieberman as I call him, is the personification of the extremes of revisionist Zionism. Now he's controlling the military. Sleep well. Lieberman and his party, this article says, have pursued a relentlessly right-wing agenda, opposing concessions in peace negotiations with the Palestinians, supporting settlement expansion, seeking to curb the rights of Israel's 20% Arab population, and attacking leftist NGOs and campaigners. Quote from Galili. Unfortunately, they, immigrants from the former Soviet states, have changed the nature of democracy in Israel. There's a certain amount of exaggeration. Many things may have changed without them, but they have a different concept of democracy, and they have strengthened and given confidence to the secular right wing. She pointed out that to some sense of alienation between Russian immigrants and native-born Israelis, there is not much social interaction. There are still places for Russians that Israelis don't go and aren't wanted, and vice versa. But she added, there was no going back. For many years, the joke was that Israel had become the 51st state of the US. Instead, we have become just another Soviet republic. It's quite a twist in the story. Well, there's another way of looking at that as well, but I take the point. And so, when we're looking at how Russia and Putin relate to Israel and its actions, etc., and we're looking at all this manipulation, all the Russians, that needs to be part of the mix if we're going to fully explore what the hell is going on and why. And this week I've been reading this book by Ronan Bergman, called Rise and Kill First. This is the secret history of Israel's targeted assassinations. And it's meticulous in its detail and its sources. And it describes how the Israeli intelligence military network, Mossad, Shin Bet, the Israeli Defense Forces, have a policy, and have had a policy going way, way back, of simply assassinating, taking out people, not just in Israel and Palestine either, who are a problem to the agenda, what I would call the revisionist Zionist agenda. And there are many connections that happen behind the scenes between Israel and Arab states you would think would be opposing Israel, like Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're bosom buddies now, especially with this Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. the United Arab Emirates, etc.